Fix your mind in 30 minutes and change how you face life. You do not suffer because life is uniquely cruel to you. You suffer because your mind has been trained, slowly and quietly, to react to everything except itself. You wake each day into a stream of demands, noise, opinions, and pressures that did not exist for most of human history. You are asked to care about more than you can reasonably carry. You are encouraged to compare yourself constantly, to anticipate disasters that have not arrived, to replay mistakes that cannot be changed, and to chase approval that never settles the mind for long. Over time, this creates a condition that feels normal, but is not. The mind becomes scattered, tense, and easily disturbed. Small frustrations feel heavy. Uncertainty feels threatening. The future becomes a source of fear rather than a field of action. You may still function, still achieve, still appear composed, yet inwardly you are tired of being pulled around by thoughts and emotions you do not fully control. That Stoicism begins at this point, not with inspiration, but with recognition. The recognition that the mind is not meant to be ruled by events, moods, or other people. The recognition that clarity, steadiness, and strength are skills, not traits you either possess or lack. And the recognition that peace does not come from arranging the world to your liking, but from arranging your judgments correctly. This is not a promise to make life easy. Stoicism does not remove pain, loss, or uncertainty. What it offers instead is something more durable, a disciplined way of seeing, thinking, and responding that allows you to remain intact, regardless of conditions. For the next half hour, you are not being asked to feel better. You are being asked to think more clearly, to place your attention where it belongs, and to begin the work of fixing the only thing that has ever truly been yours to govern. Most people believe their distress comes from what happens to them. Stoicism begins by correcting this mistake. What unsettles you is not events themselves, but the judgments you form about them. This is not a comforting idea at first. It removes the convenience of blaming circumstances, other people, or fate. But it also restores something far more valuable, agents. Every moment of your life presents impressions to the mind. A message arrives, a plan fails, someone disrespects you, your body feels tired or unwell. These impressions are automatic. You do not choose them. What you do choose, often without noticing, is whether to agree with the story your mind tells about them. The Stoics called this ascent. Between the impression and your reaction, there is a space. In that space lies your freedom. Modern life collapses this space. Notifications demand immediate response. Opinions are formed and broadcast in seconds. Emotional reactions are rewarded with attention. Under these conditions, the habit of reflection weakens. You react before you think. You suffer before you examine. You become, in effect, a servant to every stimulus that crosses your path. Stoic discipline restores the proper order. The first task is to clearly separate what depends on you from what does not. Your judgments, intentions, values, and actions are within your control. The behavior of others, the economy, your reputation, your past, your health, and the final outcome of your efforts are not fully yours to command. This distinction is simple, but its essence is demanding. Most anxiety comes from violating it. Consider how much mental energy is spent resisting facts. You want people to act differently. You want certainty where none exists. You want effort to guarantee results when reality refuses to comply. Frustration follows. The Stoic does not deny preference. You may prefer success, fairness, health, and stability, But you do not confuse preference with entitlement. You act well, then accept whatever follows. This acceptance is not passivity. It is precision. When you stop wasting effort on what you cannot control, your attention returns to what you can, the quality of your response. You speak honestly or you do not. You act with restraint or you do not. You remain calm or you surrender your composure. These are choices available even under pressure. The discipline of the mind begins with slowing down judgment. When something goes wrong, notice the first thought that appears. It is often absolute and exaggerated. This is unbearable. This should not be happening. It cannot handle this. These are not facts. They are interpretations. Treat them as such. Ask whether the situation truly prevents you from acting with reason and dignity. In most cases, it does not. Anger is a useful example. 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 Yet, most anger arises not from moral clarity, but from wounded ego. Someone failed to meet your expectations. Someone ignored your wishes. Someone challenged your status. The mind reacts by inflating the offense and narrowing perspective. In that moment, reason is not absent. It is simply dismissed. Stoicism does not demand that you suppress emotion by force. Suppression only creates tension and eventual release. Instead, it teaches you to examine emotion at its source. Ask what belief is driving it. If you believe you have been harmed, clarify what harm truly means. Has your character been damaged, or only your comfort? Has your ability to act virtuously been taken, or only your pride disturbed? The same approach applies to fear. Fear often presents itself as foresight, but it is usually speculation dressed as preparation. You imagine future losses and react to them as if they were present realities. The Stoic response is not denial of risk, but realism. Prepare where preparation is possible. Accept uncertainty where it is not. The future is not owed to you, but neither is it yours to rehearse endlessly. This discipline requires practice, because the mind prefers habits it already knows. You have likely spent years strengthening patterns of worry, resentment, and self-judgment. They will not dissolve through understanding alone. They are weakened through repeated refusal to assent. Each time you pause before reacting, you reinforce a new pattern. Each time you choose reason over impulse, you reclaim a small portion of freedom. External pressures will not stop testing this discipline. News cycles will continue to provoke fear and outrage. Social environments will continue to reward excess emotion and constant opinion. The Stoic response is not withdrawal from the world, but selective engagement. You decide what deserves your attention. You decide how much influence events are allowed to have over your inner state. This is where many misunderstand Stoicism. It is not emotional coldness. It is emotional accuracy. You still care, but you care without distortion. You still act, but without inner chaos. You accept that life includes difficulty, uncertainty, and loss, and you refuse to add unnecessary suffering through unexamined judgment. To fix the mind is not to make it silent or passive. It is to make it orderly. A disciplined mind does not eliminate feeling. It prevents feeling from ruling. It does not promise calm at all times, but it builds the capacity to return to calm without self-deception or denial. At this stage of the work, progress is quiet. There is no dramatic breakthrough. There is simply a growing awareness of your own reactions and a growing willingness to correct them. This willingness, more than any technique, is the foundation of Stoic practice. Without it, philosophy remains abstract. With it, even ordinary moments become training grounds for strength. You begin to notice that fewer things disturb you deeply, not because the world has improved, but because your judgments have become more precise. You waste less energy resisting what is unavoidable. You invest more energy in acting well where action is possible. This shift does not make life easier, but it makes you steadier. And steadiness is the prerequisite for everything that follows. As the mind becomes more disciplined, another source of disturbance comes into clearer view. Desire. Not desire in the simple sense of preference, but the deeper habit of tying your inner stability to external outcomes. Much of modern anxiety is not caused by suffering itself, but by the demand that life deliver specific results on a specific timeline, in a specific way. You want recognition for your effort. You want certainty about your future. You want comfort without vulnerability, pleasure without consequence, success without exposure to failure. These wishes are understandable. They are also dangerous when left unexamined. Each one places your peace in the hands of forces that do not answer to you. The Stoics were not opposed to enjoyment or ambition. They were opposed to dependency. When you require something external to feel whole, you surrender authority over your inner life. The more intensely you cling, the more fragile you become. This fragility expresses itself as anxiety, envy, and resentment. You begin to measure your worth by comparisons. You experience another person's success as a threat. You interpret delay as injustice and difficulty as personal betrayal. To restore balance, Stoicism asks you to revise what you value, not by rejecting comfort or achievement, but by assigning them their proper weight. Health is preferable, but not necessary for dignity. Wealth is useful, but not required for self-respect. Approval is pleasant, but irrelevant to character. When these distinctions are clear, loss still hurts, but it does not disorient. Fear operates through a similar mechanism. Fear gains strength when the mind treats imagined futures as certainties. You rehearse outcomes you cannot verify, then suffer them in advance. The body responds as if danger were present. Over time, this creates a constant low-grade tension, a readiness for threat that never fully resolves. The Stoic response is to narrow the scope of concern. You do not need to solve your entire life today. You need to act well in the present situation. You prepare reasonably for the future, then release it. This is not optimism. It is realism. You acknowledge that the future will arrive on its own terms, regardless of how intensely you worry about it. One of the most practical Stoic exercises is the deliberate contemplation of loss. This is not pessimism, it is inoculation. By calmly imagining the absence of things you value, status, possessions, relationships, physical ability, you weaken their power to shock you. If they change, you remind yourself that these things were never guaranteed. Gratitude becomes quieter and deeper. Fear loses some of its urgency. At the same time, Stoicism teaches voluntary restraint, not because pleasure is wrong, but because constant indulgence dulls the mind. When every desire is immediately satisfied, patience erodes. When discomfort is avoided at all costs, resilience fades. By occasionally choosing the harder option, less comfort, less distraction, less excess, you train yourself to remain steady under conditions you do not control. This training is especially relevant in a culture that equates ease with progress. Convenience is mistaken for improvement. Yet a life engineered to avoid all discomfort produces a mind incapable of enduring meaningful challenge. The Stoic does not seek hardship for its own sake, but does not flee it when it appears. Difficulty becomes an opportunity to practice composure, courage, and clarity. Anger, envy, and resentment often intensify when desire and fear combine. You want something you believe others are objecting. You fear being diminished or overlooked. The mind responds by assigning blame. This feels justified, but it corrodes judgment. You begin to see people not as fellow fallible humans, but as obstacles or threats. Stoicism counters this by reminding you of shared human limitation. Everyone acts from what appears good to them at the time, even when they are mistaken. This does not excuse harm, but it reframes it. You can hold others accountable without poisoning yourself with bitterness. You can defend boundaries without surrendering inner balance. Acceptance of fate plays a central role here. Fate, in Stoic terms, is not a mystical force, but the chain of causes beyond your control. You did not choose your era, your temperament, your early influences, or many of the conditions shaping your life. Resisting this reality creates friction. Accepting it allows energy to flow toward what remains possible. To accept fate is not to approve of everything that happens. It is to stop arguing with what already is. When you stop treating reality as an enemy, clarity improves. You see situations more accurately. You respond with intention rather than impulse. You conserve strength for what matters. As desire becomes more measured and fear more contained, the mind regains stability. Emotional disturbances still arise, but they pass more quickly. You recognize them as temporary movements rather than commands. This recognition creates space. In that space, you choose your response. This choice is rarely dramatic. It is often invisible to others. You pause instead of reacting. You speak less. You simplify. You let go of the need to be right, admired, or vindicated. These small decisions accumulate. Over time, they reshape your inner landscape. What emerges is not indifference, but alignment. Your values become clearer. You invest in what depends on you: integrity, effort, patience, fairness. You stop demanding that life validate you. You validate yourself through conduct. This is how the Stoic mind becomes resilient, not by hardening, but by clarifying, not by denying emotion, but by refusing to be ruled by it. Desire no longer pulls you forward blindly. Fear no longer drives you backward. You stand where you are, attentive, capable, and ready to meet whatever comes without exaggeration or collapse. This steadiness prepares you for the most difficult aspect of the philosophy, facing hardship, injustice, and mortality without illusion. That work begins when comfort is no longer the standard by which you measure a life well lived. There comes a point when discipline of thought and moderation of desire are no longer theoretical. Life eventually presents something that cannot be refrained away. Loss that alters your routine, injustice that cannot be corrected, pain that does not ask permission, or the quiet awareness that time is moving in one direction only. This is where Stoicism either proves its worth or reveals itself as mere vocabulary. The Stoic response to hardship begins with refusal to be surprised. Difficulty is not an interruption of life. It is part of its structure. When you expect permanence, fairness, and comfort as defaults, hardship feels like a violation. When you understand impermanence as the rule, hardship becomes material to work with rather than evidence of failure. This does not make pain pleasant. Stoicism never claims that grief, illness, or loss are easy. It claims something narrower and more demanding: that none of these things have the authority to destroy your character. Unless you grant it to them, you may be injured, disappointed, or wronged, but you are not stripped of your capacity to act with reason. Injustice is one of the most difficult tests. When you are treated unfairly, the impulse is to demand emotional compensation through anger or bitterness. This reaction feels like self-respect, but it often becomes self-harm. You replay the offense, you rehearse arguments, you allow the wrong to occupy more of your life than it deserves. Stoicism asks a hard question in these moments. What response preserves your dignity? Not what proves your outrage, but what keeps your mind intact. You are permitted to resist injustice, to speak, to act, to set boundaries. What you are not required to do is surrender your inner balance. In the process, you do not need to hate to be firm. You do not need bitterness to be serious. Much suffering also comes from loneliness and the sense of being unseen. Modern life connects constantly, yet isolates deeply. Stoicism does not promise belonging through external validation. It offers something quieter, self-respect, grounded in conduct. When you live according to your principles, you are no longer dependent on applause to confirm your worth. Companionship becomes meaningful, not necessary for stability. Mortality sharpens all of this. The awareness that your time is limited is not meant to induce panic. It is meant to clarify. When you remember that every conversation, effort, and irritation occurs against a finite backdrop, trivial concerns lose their grip. You become less willing to spend energy on resentment, posturing, or endless distraction. The Stoics practiced regular reflection on death, not to darken the mind, but to discipline it. If today were not guaranteed, how carefully would you choose your words? How much weight would you give to minor slights? How often would you postpone what matters? This reflection does not demand urgency, it demands sincerity. Facing mortality also reorders ambition. You may still work, build, and strive, but with a different posture. Success becomes something you pursue without clinging. Failure becomes something you endure without self-contempt. You understand that outcomes end, but character remains until the end. In this perspective, life becomes training. Every inconvenience tests patience. Every loss tests attachment. Every insult tests ego. These tests are not assigned personally, they are universal. What distinguishes people is not which tests they receive, but how they respond. The Stoic does not ask for fewer trials. He asks for a steadier mind. He understands that strength is not built in ease, but revealed under pressure. This understanding removes self-pity. You stop asking why this is happening to you and start asking how to meet it well. There is a quiet confidence that develops here. Not confidence in outcomes, but confidence in your capacity to respond. You no longer need to predict the future to feel grounded. You trust your ability to face whatever arrives with reason, restraint, and effort. This does not make life small. It makes it manageable. You stop carrying yesterday and tomorrow into moments that only require today's attention. You stop demanding that life justify itself to you. You accept that you are here to act, not to be comforted. When hardship comes, you feel it fully, but briefly. You do not dramatize it. You do not build identity around it. You treat it as a condition to be met with steadiness. When joy comes, you appreciate it without fear of losing it. You know it is temporary, and that knowledge deepens rather than diminishes it. By this stage, the mind is not fixed in the sense of being rigid. It is fixed in the sense of being oriented correctly. You know what matters, You know what does not. You know where to place your effort and where to let go. This orientation is what allows a person to move through a chaotic world without becoming chaotic himself. It does not make you immune to pain, but it prevents pain from defining you. It does not eliminate uncertainty, but it prevents uncertainty from paralyzing you. From here, the task is no longer to learn Stoicism, but to live it quietly, repeatedly, without announcement. And that task continues for as long as you do. At some point, it becomes clear that there is no final moment of mastery. There is only attention renewed each day. The mind does not remain steady because you once understood these ideas. It remains steady because you continue to practice them when it would be easier not to. Stoicism does not promise relief from effort. It redirects effort toward what is worthy of it. You still wake up to uncertainty. You still encounter loss, irritation, and doubt. The difference is that these no longer dictate the quality of your inner life. You meet them with preparation rather than surprise, with judgment rather than reflex. A disciplined mind is not a mind without struggle. It is a mind that struggles without confusion. When difficulties arise, you do not immediately ask how to escape them. You ask how to respond well. This single shift changes the texture of daily life. Problems become tasks. Emotions become signals rather than commands. Time becomes something to use, not something to fear. This way of living is quiet. It does not announce itself. It is visible only in how you speak under pressure, how you act when unobserved, how you endure without complaint, and succeed without arrogance. There is no performance in it, only consistency. You will fail at this at times. You will react poorly. You will forget what you know. Stoicism accounts for this. It does not demand perfection. It demands return. Each moment offers another chance to govern the mind more carefully than before. The work is never finished because life continues to change. That is not a flaw in the practice. It is the reason the practice exists. As conditions shift, your judgments must be renewed. As challenges evolve, your discipline must adapt. If what you have heard resonates, do not treat it as something to admire from a distance. Treat it as something to apply quietly. Observe your thoughts, question your reactions, narrow your concerns, act with care. Let go of what was never yours to control. This channel exists to support that work, not with noise or promises, but with steady reminders of what endures. If you choose to continue, return not for motivation, but for clarity. The world will remain unstable. Your task is to ensure that your mind does not mirror its disorder. Fixing the mind is not a 30-minute event. It is a lifelong discipline. But every time you choose reason over impulse, you move closer to the kind of freedom no circumstance can take away.